Good afternoon and welcome to our Ask Her series. My name is Sarah Weatherby and I am the Director of Communications for Washington Area Women's Foundation, a community-supported foundation that invests in the power of women and girls of color in the Washington, D.C. region. Ask Her is a virtual interview series featuring women leaders as well as Washington Area Women's Foundation's partners, community members, and supporters who work tirelessly for women, girls, and gender-expansive people of color. At this time, we would like to welcome each and every one of you joining us, including our American Sign Language interpreters, Amber Bertolute and Candace Johnson. If you like what you hear today, we encourage you to share it via social with your family, friends, and network by using hashtag AskHerSeries. And be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the Women's Foundation to stay informed about our latest happenings. August marks Black Philanthropy Month, a global celebration to elevate African descent giving and funding equity. And today, we are thrilled to have a timely conversation about the importance of Black giving and how we can amplify the work of Black-led and Black benefiting nonprofits who are working on the ground, empowering Black people in all facets of life. According to studies, less than 2% of philanthropic dollars go to Black-led organizations. Additionally, Black leaders on average have smaller budgets to work with and are more likely to report they lack access to and face challenges securing financial support from a variety of funding sources that their white counterparts. To introduce and moderate this important conversation, we're excited to have with us Chicago native Temi Bennett. Temi is the Director of Policy at IF. She joined the foundation in 2018, bringing years of experience as an attorney and policy expert for the Council of the District of Columbia. Temi leads several bodies of work within IF's systems, change, and reparation strategies, and she engages local governments in the DC metropolitan area as they develop and implement racially equitable and just policies that enable Black communities and other communities of color to thrive. In 2015, Temi, along with 36 women, chartered the DC chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and she currently serves on its board of directors. Temi has a passion for art, critical race theory, sci-fi fantasy novels, and Japanese manga and anime. Welcome, Temi.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's an honor to be here. And thank you to the Women's Foundation for having me and hosting this conversation. As Sarah mentioned, Black nonprofits receive less than 2% of institutional funding. Yet Black people have been able to sustain their communities without pause, none of which is recognized in traditional philanthropy. Black philanthropy just hits different. Before we dive into our conversation, I would like to divert your attention to a 3-minute video from one of our Black philanthropy's godmothers, Valaida Fullwood. This video speaks to what makes our giving, Black giving, so good.
Challenge conventional notions about philanthropy. For a long time, in my mind, the word was somehow kind of hijacked and became far more narrow than it really needed to be. The root meaning is love of humankind. And so it really wasn't about dollar signs and zeros in the check. It was really about love. And of course, commitment and passion and love drive the dollars and drive the checks, but let's not forget the root meaning. As far as the history of Black philanthropy, I don't know if I can do it justice, but my sense and a defining piece is the sense of community. The word Ubuntu, which is an African phrase that means I am because you are. So an inherent sense of mutuality and connection. Historically, our social causes and issues and civil rights have been advanced forward through collective giving, people giving what they can. Equal sacrifice, not equal amounts. African Americans give about 8.6% of our discretionary income to charitable causes, which is more than any other race in America, which is surprising to many because when you think about philanthropy and philanthropists and givers and generosity, the African American community and African Americans are often presented more on the as recipients and beneficiaries as opposed to benefactors, and where the data bears out the fact that the African American community as a whole is very generous. I'm passionate about lifting up stories and imagery around the Black community. I'm passionate about the Black community. I grew up in a very generous community in a small town, and observed the generosity among my fellow church members, my family members, the teachers. So my giving circle, when we first formed, a huge conversation was how much would we give? What would be our shared pooled amount? Some people thought $3,000 a piece. That should be our commitment a year. Others said, well, we should just give whatever you can. Shouldn't be a specific amount. Ultimately, we arrived at $365. Pretty simple enough, $1 a day. It was really important to our circle's members that our values would drive it and our shared commitment to the community. Yes, money is powerful, but if it were all about the money, a lot of issues would have already been resolved. So it's that coupled with people committing their time, sometimes devoting their lives to causes, and then the talent, the thought. Be thoughtful in your giving. Giving from the heart is wonderful, and I think giving from the heart and head and mind is really powerful. You can share your story in a way that can inspire, can again make giving and philanthropy more accessible to others. When were you first aware of generosity? When did you observe it? When did you benefit from it? And how did it change your life? Let that story influence where you give.
So joining us today, I'm excited to introduce Chelsea Brown, founder of the Black Mill, and Kelly Darnell, Chief Operating Officer for the Bipartisan Policy Center. Both Kelly and Chelsea are a part of the unique fabric of Black generosity, also known as Black philanthropy. But before we begin, I want to let them introduce themselves. So Chelsea, let's start with you. Share with us whatever you want us to know about you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for having me here. I am Chelsea Brown. I am a native of South Carolina, but I've lived in Baltimore for about 8 or 9 years. So Maryland has taken my heart. Some things that may not be on my bio: I'm a huge reality TV show fan to a disgustingly point of I love anything Real Housewives. I also just celebrated a milestone birthday. I just turned 30 in early August. Thank you. So very excited to kind of move into my next decade. And then a random fact that I always like to share is that I've once gone viral on Twitter for a very, very strong debate about whether Chris Brown or Usher would win the Versus. So that is the one kind of claim to fame that I have on there. But again, kind of the big facts: I graduated from Winthrop University in 2014, graduated from the University of Maryland School of Public Policy in 2021, as well with a master's in public management with a focus in nonprofit management and leadership. So very excited to have this conversation. Black philanthropy is something I'm always excited to talk about. So very excited to dive a little deeper, especially during this month.
Well, happy belated birthday. Welcome to the dirty 30s, or, I don't even know what people call it, but welcome to 30. Chelsea, I have a question though, real quick before I pass the mic to Kelly. Where did you come down on that debate? Was it Chris Brown or?
I said Usher.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. To die on. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going with Usher too.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Kelly, passing to you. Share with us whatever you want us to know about you today.
I'm not quite sure how I followed that, but so in full disclosure, I had technical issues, so I don't want you on why we started late. So I want to make sure people know that. So of course you can see my bio. I am a proud Spelman grad. and went to Maryland for my master's in public policy, and then went to law school at AU, and was always interested in policy and policy work. What I didn't realize is that I didn't realize how much I would use that to promote Black causes at the time. Initially, I just thought I wanted people, because I have a very unique background in that my mom was a foster kid her entire life, and my dad had a third grade education. My mom went to college when I was in she started college when I was 4. So I went to preschool on a community college campus, and she went on to graduate. And at the time, what always stuck with me was, how does everybody have that opportunity to succeed? And how do you do that through policy? And so I knew probably from high school on that I wanted to have some type of role in legislation and changing policy. I just didn't realize how helpful it would be on this side of it in helping our people and really promoting the causes that are most important to us, and not just promoting them, but also being able to solve them in more of a systemic way. So I would, just share that. Yesterday was my birthday. It was not a milestone birthday, and I can promise you 30 was a long, long time ago. So enjoy these 30s. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, because honestly, I wish when I was 30, I was more educated on the issue of Black philanthropy and understood how to use it for our benefit in the way that I can tell young people how to make it work for you. So thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And you look amazing. So don't worry about the number. Well, let's get into it, ladies. So as we round up Black Philanthropy Month and reflect on generations of Black giving, what makes giving personal for you as a Black, outside of the fact that we're Black women, right? What makes giving personal to you? And let's start with Kelly, you start this one.
Okay. It always sticks with me how grateful I am and how many benefits that I have received. And I never think that whole idea of you pull yourself up by your bootstraps is the most ridiculous notion that people still talk about. And so my giving is really, how can I just know I've had advantages, and I really do want to give back, and I want people to have the same opportunities that I've had. I also, because I care so much about my alma mater, I definitely believe in giving, but to our HBCUs, they cannot stay open without us. I think that in many ways, historically, Black colleges are our last Black institutions. Now that people don't go to church as much, we don't have those communities as much, our HBCUs are something that we must value. And so that's kind of my philosophy on giving. I want every single person, and it's not just my philanthropy and giving in dollars. That also means philanthropy and giving in who I hire and who I reach out to and who I mentor. It's money, but it's also my time, and it's using my power in ways that help other Black people.
Thank you. And shout out to the HBCUs. I am a VSU Trojan. I think what you said around really being those institutions that are germane to the Black experience in this country. We go back for homecoming. We pledge Divine Nine there. Like, there are lifelong relationships that are created there, but also sometimes it's the first time that folks are completely around Black folks, right? And can have this quintessential Black experience uninterrupted by some of the trauma that comes with white supremacy, right? So passing the mic to you, Chelsea, what makes Black giving so personal to you?
Yeah, Kelly, you said a lot of what I believe in philanthropy and what makes it personal for me as well. What I love to say is there is no way that I would be in the positions that I am now had it not been for Black women mainly a Black man, utilizing their time, talent, or treasure to help me get to that point. And so when I think about what philanthropy means to me, it means how can I utilize those things to make sure that other people get to where they need to go. I think about me going to school. I received scholarships that were created by Black alums from my school, right? So they wanted to kind of keep that pipeline going. Had it not been for them, I would not have had the opportunity to be where I was at the time. And so I think for me, philanthropy means, it means thinking about it in the way that makes sense, thinking about it in the way that makes sense for you. I think a lot of the times philanthropy gets this rep of you have to be giving $1 million and you have to, be an old white man and you have to do this and you have to do that in order to be a philanthropist. But I think about all the people in my life that have given time, talent, or treasure. They don't look like that. They're my age, they're older, they're Black women, Black men, things like that. And so to me, philanthropy looks like being able to kind of bring that narrative forward for other people to utilize philanthropy in the way that makes sense for them. So yeah. But Kelly said a lot of the things that I agree with as well. So thank you for saying that.
And it's so important to acknowledge that philanthropy is not just money, right? It's not just, and it doesn't have to be a whole lot of money. We've been talking about access to opportunities, right? And other ways of giving that it can be life-changing for people. So Kelly, let's come back to you. You're now the Chief Operating Officer at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And in your experience working within the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector, how have you been able to leverage philanthropic leadership throughout your career? And what advice would you give to other Black women looking to do the same?
I encourage Black women, Black people, especially young Black people, to use philanthropy to their advantage. Use philanthropy, yes, you're giving your time, talent, and treasure. However, there is a professional aspect to philanthropy as well. Get involved. Those small dollar donations still get you at a seat at the table. You meet so many people when you get involved as a donor in an organization. Get on a board, serve on a board, because the people you meet on these boards, a lot of them are very senior executives, and you never know where your next opportunity is going to come from, whether it be professional or personal. I am the chair of the DC Bar Foundation this year, and I am at the helm of, and I'm working with these very experienced lawyers, partners at big firms, and quite frankly, icons that I've known through the years and never thought that I would have an opportunity to meet. And they're sitting there, they're looking at me and they will say, our great leader, Kelly Darnell, or she's the best chair. These are people I would never have access to. And now not only do I have access to them, but they hold me in high regard so that I can reach out to them when I need something, or when I need to tell them about a candidate, or, how they can be mentors. And so we have to start to use philanthropy in a way that also works for us. I think as Black women, we're so impact and what can we do for the community, and, how can we help? But we also need to think about it as how can it help us? I hate to be so tactical about it, but that is the reality. How can it help you and your personal career and, privately, and what you want to accomplish? I think there might have been a second part of that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think self-care, and even self-care to your professional career, is important, right? As a Black woman, we always tend to worry about everybody else, and sometimes to the detriment of ourselves, even physically, our bodies, right? And so taking care of you is the only way that you can take care of others. So I really like that point, Kelly. Chelsea, so you have been recognized as one of the leading next generation philanthropic leaders. And as someone younger, and you're talking to two women on the much other side of 30, I'm not going to claim that we're not innovative though, but I'm going to say most people, as you get older, folks do get more stuck in their ways, right? And the youth are known to be more open to innovation. What are some of the ways that you've been able to leverage your approach to giving in new and innovative ways as someone younger in this field?
For sure. So like most people, or from what I've heard, I fell into philanthropy mainly because I saw a problem and I wanted to fix it. And what I saw was that money, or giving money at that point was kind of the piece that would help me kind of get to that point. When I was working in Baltimore initially, I worked at a institution that was predominantly Black serving. So all of the students were Black, the majority of staff were Black, but you would see white board members kind of move up and through, the building, not say anything to the students, not say anything to the staff, things like that. But they'd go upstairs and make decisions that related back and directly impacted the families and students of that institution. And so for me, that was a huge problem, right? Why are we not working with more Black leaders that can be board members that are from this area that can speak to some of the experiences that these students are dealing with? And so that mainly because of that, I said, well, people can come in and just start scholarships. Why can't I? And so from that, I went back to my alma mater, had the opportunity to create a scholarship. And from that, kind of what Kelly was mentioning, I had the opportunity to leverage philanthropy and make it work for me. Since then, I've been on the board. I'm the only Black woman on the board, and I'm the youngest person on the board. So I'm always speaking to, yes, that is the experience that maybe you all have had, but that is not what I can speak to from someone who graduated in 2014. And so the way that I've been able to leverage, I do think there's power in being a part of boards. I do think there's power in giving money, right? The conversation can look really different when you're giving money, and you also have suggestions for an institution or a place. And so I think the best way that I've been able to leverage, or that I encourage people to leverage, is to think outside of the box. I always kind of come back with, why is the only way that we provide opportunities for people to give online, right? Like what it would look like to have a Cash App for this foundation or nonprofit, or what's the TikTok presence to get people to give? What are other ways that we can use celebratory moments to really make sure that it's easy for people to give? That's the biggest thing for me, making it very easy for people to give and making it feel accessible. And so for me, leveraging kind of these innovative ways is all about what is happening across the landscape. Are we talking to people who are younger or new generations about maybe why they don't give, right? Are we having these conversations? And if not, when are we going to do that, right? Because these people will eventually turn into 30, 40, 50-year-old potential donors, and you want to be the first thing that they think about giving to. And so my thoughts as far as leveraging kind of innovative ideas is making sure that you're asking the landscape and that you're not making assumptions, and that you're making sure that it all makes sense for the demographic that you want. How do you make it easy? How do you make it accessible? And also thinking about even applications, which I plan on mentioning later on, but thinking about applications for funding with institutions. Are we making this easy and accessible, or is it one of those things where people have to know somebody in order to be funded? How do we make this easy in an inclusive way for people to receive funding?
Thank you, Chelsea. And so, Candace, are we okay on speed? I feel like I'm gonna ask us to slow down just a little bit to make sure our ASL sisters can catch up with us, and we're not speaking too fast. So I do want to talk about the future a little bit. And so we had this moment during the pandemic with a lot of police killings of unarmed Black people, particularly George Floyd, and people were saying this was a racial reckoning, right? I don't agree with that, particularly for folks that have been fighting fighting structural racism for forever, right? But there were all these commitments that people made, right? When there were all these statements that organizations made, particularly the private sector. And we know the money did not follow where the mouth was. When it came to the action, there was no action. And even now, I hear rumblings like, oh, Can we stop talking about Black people? Can we stop? Can we pivot, right? Oh my God, we have to talk about the climate, right? We have to talk about democracy. We have to talk about gun violence. But if we look at those issues, they're all rooted in anti-Blackness and racism, right? And so there are ways that what we know is that white supremacy adapts. And this is one of those moments where people are trying to shift. Well, okay, George Floyd happened a few years ago. We're over it. Now we did our statements. We're doing the things. Juneteenth, everybody knows about it. Like, now can we pivot to something else? And I have a question. Let's go back to Chelsea, because folks think that they've addressed, we've addressed the racial reckoning, right? We said the things, we tweeted the things, we said the things on our company page, etc. My question for you is: are we moving towards a state of financial liberation for these Black-led and Black benefiting organizations? Amidst all these, I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, but I want you to answer it here, right? Are we moving to a state of financial liberation? And if yes, how so? And if not, what more needs to be done, in your opinion?
Yeah. So my answer, it's no. I think that we are slowly, and when I say slowly, I mean very slowly, getting to the point where that is even a potential reality for some of these organizations. My argument, I've worked in the fundraising field for about 6 years and transitioned into corporate social responsibility. And so you see that those are usually the departments that those commitments come from and things along those lines, and that's where the funding comes from. But I still see a lot of the antiquated systems in which they provide funding, right? So for example, when a lot of folks made those commitments, they were giving to a lot of the same institutions, right? Or the same organizations, not taking the time to research other institutions or organizations that might be more grassroots, that might have a little bit more direct services, that, that type of money could really be life-changing for them. And so until institutions or private foundations start thinking in that way, I think there's always going to be this large disconnect between what it is that Black-led organizations can do and what their white counterparts are currently doing. Until we are able to have that conversation of let's actually be intentional and not rush to just give funding to whomever, I think that's always going to be a concern. And also, Black-led organizations and nonprofits are already coming at a disadvantage. There's a lack of access. There's a lack of social capital. There's again, philanthropy can be very exclusive. So if you don't know anyone who's on this committee making the decision about funding, how will you be able to apply, right? And so I think that there's a lot of disadvantages. There's a lot of other things that Black people have to deal with when thinking about how they receive funding, how they move forward with their nonprofit, that white counterparts just don't have to think about, and white institutions or white people making the decisions on where the funding goes, they also do not have to think about. So my answer would be no. My answer would be no. Yeah,
I agree with you.
Yes.
Kelly, as a fellow policy head.
Hold on, Temi. I gotta hit that answer.
Okay, yeah, please do.
I had to write some notes on that. First, when everything happened and everyone was coming out with their statements, I told the young staffers who really wanted us to have this amazing statement, and they wanted us to be off for Juneteenth. So this is 2020. And I told them, I do not care anything about a statement. Statements are dumb. All these companies who have come out with statements and who rushed to give their employees off for Juneteenth were the same companies that had so many discrimination lawsuits. And I said, you cannot look at these companies as an example. And I don't care about what is happening now. What I need you to do is to not get tired of this issue when it becomes hard and everybody thinks like where we are now. It's been enough time. We're tired of talking about Black people. I knew we would get to this time. I didn't care about those statements. I said, I need y'all to stand strong when it gets hard. First. Second, I would say that I was speaking to a very large organization, philanthropic, and they were having issues with their DEI. Of course, they don't have a diverse staff and they didn't have anyone in leadership. And with all due respect to a lot of DEI folks and companies and these large foundations and nonprofits, I just had to be honest and said, look, I don't care about your chief diversity officer. They can't do anything. I don't care about your VP of HR. They can't do anything either. Until you get somebody Black in that COO, CFO, CEO role at a large white organization who actually has the power to make these changes, you won't have any changes. You will not have a diverse staff. You will not be able to change the culture in your organization. By throwing up some folks and saying, okay, we've addressed it because we have this person over here that has no power, is not doing anything to push your foundation. And lastly, I have two more things. Then, Black organizations are not all created the same. And unfortunately, companies and big foundations will go to those same old organizations that, I'm sorry, don't do a lot to push our agenda, but they like bringing in a lot of money and they have the name. And that is where foundations don't do their research and they make it so hard. Chelsea, you were so on with foundations, unless it's like secret squirrel and you know who to call. You have no access to these big dollars. And I think it's important too. So I'm of course not at a Black-led organization, but we do need that same support because I'm sitting in the seat and because I need to prove, I need to show I'm creating this racial equity agenda in a bipartisan way with a lot of people who don't necessarily believe, right, in racial equity because we are conservative and liberal. And so it's like foundations, you have to support this mission because of the power that I know I have in changing policy and dealing with systemic issues. So I will stop there. Thank you, Temi. Thank you for indulging me.
No, of course, and thank you for sharing. And I do want to lift up and shout out participatory grant making, though, as a strategy to try to shift and having folks to try to shift traditional philanthropy, but then also trying to centering community in a way that those most impacted by systems of oppression actually get to decide and have a voice in the resources that are coming into their communities. Mm-hmm. And so, Kelly, I'm coming back to you around policy because you already talked a little bit about policy. And tell me, for me, like systems change happens at the policy level, not the program level. So talk to me about the role that policy plays in removing systemic barriers for mm-hmm. for nonprofits, particularly the Black nonprofits.
I mean, I think to broaden it out from just nonprofits, well, what I would like to see more nonprofits do, especially in this kind of racial equity space, social justice space, what happens is they all talk to each other. It's like they're all in this circle where they're only talking to each other. And unfortunately, that is not how policy change happens. It's like, I want these nonprofits, one, to start thinking a little more broadly about how do you address these issues. Just talking about them is not accomplishing anything. Just talking to others about them is not accomplishing anything. Sitting down to figure out, can you partner with someone to advocate, on advocacy, to advocate on the local, state, and federal level. Just because you're advocating does not mean you're lobbying. You don't have to register. What are you actually doing to change laws and not just talking to each other? Writing white papers where only folks in the same community are going to read is not pushing the agenda. I hate to say, I know a lot of folks will say it's not our job to educate other folks, But if we want to see major policy changes, it is our job. Like, it's something we just have to suck up, because unfortunately, what I have found in my position, it's not always that they dislike us or they don't want to do anything for us. What I find is they don't even think about us, right? They don't even, it just never occurs to them, right? Our issues. And so I had a situation where someone said, I was talking about access to capital in small business and doing something in New York. And someone said, well, those issues have been solved already. And I said, not for Black people, not for Black women. And I realized, was like, they just don't even think about us. So to see systemic change with nonprofits, I just want nonprofits to like talk to different types of organizations who can actually push the agenda forward. And it might be baby steps. And I think all of us want to see these huge, we want to see policy change in leaps and bounds, but I'd rather see a little something than nothing. And right now we're not accomplishing anything.
So I want to, before we I have a last question, but I'm gonna wait for that last question, and we want to open up Q&A. And as we're waiting for people to put in questions, I want to get back to like this question around policy and making and policy changes. I feel like philanthropy is really getting into advocacy, right? My role was created at a traditional private foundation. I'm the director of policy. And for me, education is extremely important, both popular and political education. And it's not just the advocates, right? The community needs to be educated, because as an attorney who used to work in local government, I can get legislation passed. I can get maybe not nothing can get passed at the federal level because we're just ridiculous. But at the local level, one advocate can get some policy passed, right? But it takes a community, it takes more than one person to hold a government accountable for that legislation, right? You have to come back and you have to see what they did that year. You got to be at the performance hearing. You got to be at the budget hearing. You got to make sure that the policy is funded and implemented the right way. And that's power. And if you're disengaged, then you're not tracking. A lot of times you'll have politicians just use it as a talking point. I introduced such and such legislation. Nobody's holding them accountable on whether or not it was implemented or funded, or what changes happened after it was introduced. Maybe you introduced something that didn't go anywhere. Why are you getting credit for a talking point versus actual action? And I think, and it takes an educated community to be able to check that power. That was my soapbox. I'm gonna get off of it.
Absolutely true. That is absolutely true.
But back to y'all. Chelsea, let's start with you. What advice would you give someone who wants to serve on a nonprofit board, and how should they get started? And then Kelly, same question.
Yeah, so
Chelsea didn't give us all the answers.
I think, the biggest advice that I would have, I know when I first joined a board, I was really nervous because I was so young, and I'm like hearing different terms. I'm like, I don't know what that means. And I didn't feel comfortable to ask those questions. I would say push through that. You're on there for a reason. You are invited for a reason. And to make sure that you're asking good questions and that you're asking so that you can be able to advocate, right? So whenever I come into a board meeting, they already know. I'm like, I care about everything else, but I'm here for one thing and one thing only. What are we doing with Black alums, right? And so they already know that the conversation is going to steer that way. So we need an answer, right? And being able to say, I've already spoken with the director of development. We've done surveys. We've done X, Y, and Z. Like, things are moving and shaking. we need to get some action going. It goes back to that advocacy piece, right? A community is needed. One person can do one thing, but where's the accountability? Mm-hmm. What we normally see, or what we can see sometimes with nonprofit organizations, is there's a lot of those commitments. There's a lot of, oh, the board said that we're going to do this. We're going to push on this. We know we need to do X, Y, and Z, but I feel like, it's a burden and a honor to be able to be the person to hold those people accountable. And so for me, my final kind of word of advice is to find the thing that is passionate for you, like the thing that you want to push forward and the thing that you want to support, and be on them. Like, don't ever let up. I think it's easy to kind of, be steered another way versus saying like, no, I'm going to make sure that we are doing what we say we're going to do, and that I'm holding you accountable, I'm holding myself accountable, and I'm holding everyone else accountable as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chelsea. Kelly, to you.
To get on boards, I would say tell everyone, have a little committee of people that you can turn to, even if you think they would never return your phone call. Make a list of folks you want to know. 9 times out of 10, they will completely meet with you, and they'll be so excited that you took the initiative and reached out to them. But start telling people, I'm interested in joining a board. I'm interested in joining this kind of board. And people will really remember that you said that. And when there are opportunities, they will come to you. So use not even your network, right? Because you're going to reach beyond that for people to be to know what you're interested in. And I would say know why you're joining the board. Know what your role is going to be. Maybe you are the person who your expertise is in human resources, and that's what you're going to, or operations, and that's what you're going to bring to the board. Maybe it's fundraising. A lot of times when we work at nonprofits, and we're on the board of a nonprofit, you can't always fundraise. So, be honest about, I don't think I can really serve that role, but I know finance, so my expertise on my role is going to be to really be a financial person. And lastly, I would say, stretch yourself, join some committees on a board where you don't know anything. So if you don't know anything about finance and audit, join the finance and audit committee, because you will learn a lot on those committees. Join some committees and volunteer to do some things that you aren't comfortable with, because it will be really valuable to you in the end. I worked in finance, but that was very different than understanding a balance sheet. So, on some boards, I joined the finance committee and just suffer through all of that and the audit, just because I'm learning a lot. And quite frankly, it helps me on my day. It helps me in my day job. So just really stretch yourself and use boards as a learning opportunity for you.
I love that. I'll tell you, a few years ago, we realized all the white men on our board were on the Finance and Investment Committee. And it was like, hold on, I joined the Finance Investment Committee. We asked some 2 other Black women to join the Finance and Investment Committee. And it's so important. And people get scared when it comes to the money, but that's the power. Don't be afraid of that responsibility. Learn about it. And it takes you, of course, we could read a balance sheet, but I wasn't able to ask our investment and money managers about the market, right? I didn't feel like I could ask questions. I could read it and I understood the numbers, but I didn't have any background or any education around is this good or is it bad? What should we be doing? And I think I love that advice around stretching yourself, particularly around the finance and investment, because that's where we are not as Black people. And I'll tell you, when as the sector really starts talking about impact investments, BIPOC money managers and wealth management companies, folks will tell you all day, every day that there's no talent, and there is talent out there. You just don't know how to find it. And so I encourage Black folks to learn about finance and investment. And when people tell you there are no Black wealth management companies out there, or BIPOC folks don't have the talent to do this and it just isn't there, that is a lie. My next question is around the numbers. So I feel like the first time I actually called myself a philanthropist is when I became an ambassador for our museum. And so that was a program. It was the African American Museum when we opened years ago. Before we even opened, they had this program called the Ambassador Program for young professionals who wanted to give but didn't have $10,000 to give, right? And so we could give $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, but just pay it monthly. And so you were just paying like $80 for either 5 years, for 10 years, et cetera, to get to that number. And that was the first time I was like, oh, I'm a philanthropist, but I've also been on other boards, right? And I've also, some boards will have a financial requirement for their board members and some folks won't. And for one of my boards, we did have a financial requirement and it was about $2,000. And I encourage folks, going back to Chelsea around innovation, my organization didn't have a matching program. So a lot of organizations will have a matching program that supports their employees' giving. And so my organization didn't have a matching program, but my mother is at a private foundation in Chicago and they matched 5 times. So I would just give my mom like $500, right? And she would give my $500. And then that organization didn't receive $2,500 from them plus my $500. So now I've surpassed my requirement and it wasn't my personal dollars, right? I had another foundation matching me. So what are some other so this is a twofold question. Is there a magic number? Do you have to have, is there a number that says this is how much you need, right, in order to become a philanthropist? And then 2, what are other ways that people can get to that matching outside of traditional fundraising? And it can go to either one, whoever wants to go first, Chelsea or Kelly.
I don't mind going. So for me, you give $10, you give $1,000, you give $1,500, whatever. You're a philanthropist, right? And I think one thing that I've seen across the board is a lot of, at least young Black people, don't see themselves as philanthropists. But then I ask, okay, well, how much do you give to church, right? How much did you give to support this person to go do X, Y, and Z? Like, you're a philanthropist, like that's you. And so I think that, kind of taking away that minimum, right, of like, oh, if you give 100, then you're determined X, Y, and Z. I think getting people in the practice, to me, is what makes people a philanthropist, because it all adds up. It all supports something, right? It's $10 more that they didn't have before. It's $100 more than they didn't have before. So I definitely think that plays a role. Remind me of the second part of the question. I wrote it down, but I think.
Are there other ways people can find the funds without traditional fundraising? And when I say traditional fundraising, I mean like calling around their networks and asking people for funds. Are there other ways that people can support a financial strategy of a nonprofit?
So one thing that I always encourage, again, it's like taking stock of what gets the people going, right? So for example, my alma mater, we did not at the time have a lot of Black alums that were giving. But we knew that Black alums were coming down for homecoming. We knew that they like to go to brunch. They like to go do X, Y, and Z. So my question was, well, why don't we just host something that is in relation to something that people are going to do anyways and give a portion of it to the Black Alumni Council Fund? Everyone was like, that is brilliant. I'm like, I just feel like that just makes sense, right? Let's not reinvent the wheel. If people are already coming to X, Y, and Z, are already doing X, Y, and Z, let's make it work for us. Let's make them feel connected to the university or this institution in a different way. And so again, I'm all about, how do we take stock of what is happening currently? What are the things that people are going to go to? What are the things that people like to give to or support? Even for institutions, why are we not being strategic about saying, okay, if you give this certain amount, right, it can go to your divine organization that you pledged to on campus, right? People definitely feel connected to that, right? So let's have this narrative, let's have this story and make sure that it actually does what it's supposed to do and connect people back. So I actually love that idea that you did with your mother. Like, I think I am definitely going to pass that story around, because I definitely think a lot of people don't think about innovative ways in that way. Using your matching gifts. I've asked people multiple times, like, do you have a matching gift program? They're like, I don't know. You should ask. so you can get that double money, right? And you can give more impactfully without having to utilize all of your funds. And that takes away that kind of scariness of being a philanthropist, right? Of feeling like you have to give way more than maybe what your capacity allows.
Thank you, Chelsea. And Kelly, before you answer, I do want to give y'all the last question and ask Kelly to add this to your question, and Chelsea will come back to you, which is, what do you want your giving legacy to be?
Well, I'll just start that, going back, and I think philanthropy, it's the money, but then it's also you doing a little research on how was it spent, right? So like, okay, you gave $25 to an organization, just do that next step and find out about that organization, right? And figure out some other ways that you can get involved when they start sending you the newsletters and those things. And the other idea about giving is, I have a friend who throws a chili party every year. She gets 5 people to bring chili, and she raises money for a cause. That's just a house party. I met my husband at that chili party, actually. And so that's like smaller than a brunch. That's just having folks at your house saying, hey, come donate $100. It's going to this cause. And that's so easy to do. My giving legacy. I have this dream of giving a ton of money to Spelman. So my giving legacy is really going to be supporting my alma mater, because I don't, as we talked earlier about HBCUs, I care so much about them. I want them to be strong, and I want all Black people. We go to homecoming, we go to reunion, we have a good time, we party, and then we don't give back. And so, I want my legacy. I want my kids to see I am supporting this thing that means so much to me.
So Kelly, you and I have the same giving legacy dream, because I want my name on a building at my alma mater. So I want it. And I think, again, for me, going to PWI, I mean, we have buildings named after some of the most egregious white men in the state of South Carolina. And we have one that is specifically for or named after a Black woman, the only one on campus, right? I want to be the second. Well, shoot, by that time, I hope to be the 5th, right? But I want to be able to show like we are here and we give back. And for me, not only do I want the building to have, my name or like be dedicated to that me, because I've given so much to my university, but also I wanted to serve as like an institute for people of color, and more specifically Black people on campus who want to work in the philanthropy field. That was one of the biggest draws for me at University of Maryland. I had never seen a program like that where they had an institute specifically focused on nonprofits or philanthropy. And so I want to bring that across the board. There's so many people that want to do impactful work, and I want to bring them to the water. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you both of y'all. Okay, we're at time. And if you've enjoyed your time with us today, there are 2 more days left to consider donating to support Black Philanthropy Month. And you can go to wawf.org/give828. And be sure to also connect with the Women's Foundation on social media to stay up to date on all the good work they're doing for Black girls and women in this area. Chelsea and Kelly, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your giving. Thank you for your lessons and wisdom. And thank you, Sarah and Women's Foundation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.